Hello everyone, very good evening. This is Ajay Shah, and in this short video tutorial we are going to analyze the topic that is G7. And G7 is very important from the prelims and mains point of view. So in this video lecture we are basically going to see the fact sheet which is important from the prelims examination, and then we will see why G7 is in news, the context of the news, and then we will see some issues which are important from the mains point of view. So let's start the lecture. So the very first thing is that we should know the names of the members who are the part of this G7. So G7 is nothing but G7 is a group of 7 countries, and all those countries are basically developed countries. So the members are Germany, UK, France, Canada, US, Italy, Japan. So you should notice one thing is that India is not a member, China is not a member, and even Russia is not a member. Another fact that should be noticed here is that all these countries are developed nations, developed countries. Now let us see the map of the span of G7. So in this map, very easily we can see that G7 is not truly a global organization like United Nations, or we can say G20, but it is a club of rich nations, developed nations. So now let us see some fact sheet. So the first thing is that who are the members of this group 7? So I told you the members as Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and US. So this is a code word CJIFWG. By this you can recall all these members. In UPSC, basically many times UPSC is interested in knowing the members of global famous groups. So now G7 is an intergovernmental organization. It means that the government of respective countries, they have basically established this organization G7 in 1975. Now in 1975, what was the context of establishment of G7? 1970s energy crisis was the immediate trigger which forced the world leaders to make a group, basically a group to deal with this energy crisis of 1970s. And also Nixon shock was also a context in that during the establishment of G7. Now Canada is a country which is a part of G7, but Canada joined G6 in 1976, and before 1976 it was basically G6, and in 1976 with the involvement of Canada it became G7. Apart from the 7 members, the European Union is also represented in G7, but European Union is not a member. So European Union is represented by European Council and European Commission in all the G7 summits. Now G7, it was before 1997, it was G8 because Russia was also a member of G8. So Russia was member and Russia joined G7 to become G8 in 1997. But in 2014, after Ukraine crisis, Russia was expelled from this group, and so after 2014 the group became like before, that is G7, and now it is popularly known as G7 only. Now G7 is not having any formal constitution, any headquarter, any permanent secretariat like we have in United Nations, but G7 is an informal group and all the decisions are taken by the leaders during the summits, and all those decisions are obviously non-binding. Now let us see the summits because UPSC always asks the questions of summit. So the first summit was in 1975, that is in France. The 45th summit, that is the last summit, the latest summit, was in 2019, again in France. And in this summit, India was also invited. In 46, that is the 46th summit of G7 was supposed to be in June 2020 in US, but because of this, the pandemic of COVID-19, it has now been cancelled. So you can easily see that G7 was established in 1975, and the upcoming G7 summit is 46th summit. So you can notice the consistency of summit. G7 has consistently called all the summits every year. Now the question is how G summits basically function. So let us talk about the host. So basically in this year 2020, US is the host country. So in G7 always there will be a host country, and how the host is selected? The host is selected by rotational basis. For example, in 2019 France was the host, in 2020 it's US, in 2021 UK will be the host country, then Germany, Japan, Italy, Canada. So basically the host country is out of rotation. Now the host country, the country which basically call all the leaders in the G summit, the leader generally invites some other members also. For example, in 2019, India was also invited. Now, how the decisions are executed, the decisions which have taken place in G summits. So there is a concept of Sherpa. What is Sherpa? Sherpa is nothing but Sherpa is a kind of the key person who act like a representative in G7, and he has the function, he has the responsibility to execute all the decisions that have been taken place in G20 summits. For example, in 2019, Suresh Prabhu was Sherpa of India, that is, he was representative of Narendra Modi, and he had the responsibility to execute everything that took place in the summit. Now, often we are supposed to make comparison between G7, G8, G11, and G20. Now, what is G7? I told you. What is G8? If we include Russia in G7, then it becomes G8. Now, what is G11? G11 is nothing but G11 is a mooted idea. Donald Trump, the president of US, he has mooted an idea of G11. And basically, he wants to include 4 countries in G7, that is India, Russia, Australia, and South Korea. Now, what is G20? In G20, all the members of G7 and plus other members are the part of G20, like we have China in G20. Now you can expect a question on what's the difference between G7 and G20. So let's see the table. So in G7 we have 7 members, in G20 we have 20 members. That is very obvious. G7 was founded in 1975 and G20 was founded in 1999. Now what was the trigger event? In 1975 the trigger event was energy crisis. In 1999 the trigger event was global economic crisis. Basically Asian financial crisis of 1997 was the trigger event for foundation of G20. Now, these are the member countries in G7. Apart from G7, other countries like China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, they are also part of G20. Now, as far as objective is concerned, in G7, there can be a range of topics. There can be very broad topics like terrorism, then can be environment discussion, and then human trafficking, transnational crimes, etc. But as far as G20 is concerned, G20 is basically interested in economics and finance. Okay. So now what's the recent development here? So recent development is, I already told you, Donald Trump. So I told you that G7 was basically, it was supposed to be in US this year, but due to pandemic, it was cancelled. And also Donald Trump has said that this G7 has become outdated. It has become outdated and now we should involve other countries also. And Trump has mooted the idea to involve Russia, India, South Korea, and Australia. Now, India, South Korea and Australia, they have accepted the invitation by Donald Trump, but Russia has said that Russia will accept the invitation only when Russia is treated as par with other countries, that is Russia is demanding equality. Now, Donald Trump has invited all the other leaders, but Donald Trump has purposefully left China, so that is going to have some kind of global ramification in that. Now let us see from the mains point of view, what are the opportunities that when India is going to be the part of G11, what are the opportunities for India? So the very first opportunity is that India will have a global stature and India will have global say, and it can be helpful in the global aspiration of India, in which India wants to become the permanent part of United Nations Security Council. And then again, it will be a defining part in which we can study the global growing partnership between India and US. So since India and US, they are going closer to each other, so this G11 will define and that will strengthen the relationship, and that is particularly very important in context of Pakistan, US and India, and also in context of US-Afghan policy, because US has almost decided to exit the Afghanistan. And also we can see this in context of US pivot Asia policy, in which US is growing its presence in Asia Pacific. Now, apart from this, India can also see this opportunity in terms of Quad. Quad is a group of US, Japan, India and Australia. And since Donald Trump is inviting India and Australia both in this group, so we can see this G11 in terms of Quad. And apart from that, it should be noticed here that once India and Russia become the members of G11, then India can very easily manage its relationship both with USA also and Russia also. And also India is always a vocal supporter of multipolar world. And since India supports the idea of multipolar world, so G7 is nothing but it's an idea which can be manifested in form of multipolar world. And one of the things that India can see as an opportunity, because in G11 is going to be the only global organization where China is not a member. So a global organization where China is not a member is certainly going to be beneficial for India. But apart from opportunity, we have several challenges also. So what are the challenges? The first challenge is that I told you that any host of G7 summit, he has the right to invite any of the countries. He can invite that, not as a member, but as an special invitees. So Trump has invited India. But the problem is that the composition of G7, that is the composition from G7 to G11, can be changed only and only when other countries are comfortable with that. So it's not only about the US, but other 6 countries should also give consent, and then only India can become a member. But other countries, they are not having any kind of irritation factor with respect to India. But as far as Russia is concerned, it is doubtful that other members will give consent for Russia. Fine. Now, another thing is that in US there are elections. President election is there in November. So it is again doubtful that whether the G7 summit is going to be there in US or not. But as far as recent news is concerned, then Trump has promised that he is going to hold the summit along with the United Nations General Assembly summit, that is in September. Now, one more challenge with respect to India or the other members who are going to be the part of G7 is that we can see the history of G7. So before in 1997, when there was Asian economic crisis, then the president of America, that is Bill Clinton, he mooted the idea of expansion of G7, and then G20 came into picture. So after 24 years, again one of the American president, that is Donald Trump, is mooting the idea of expanding the G7. So it's very complicated, and we have to read the mind of the president of US, why they always do the same kind of thing, and we should be very, very cautious. Then one more thing that has to be noticed here is that along with India, US has also invited Russia. So it is a fact which has to be noticed here, because US is not comfortable with Russia, and we can see that in context of neo-Cold War that is going on between US and Russia, and it is very difficult to understand, despite of having such kind of irritating relationship with Russia, why US has invited Russia in that platform, that is G7. Now again, one more thing is that since US has not invited China, so this G11 might become a theater of Cold War between US and China. And since it is going to be a theater of Cold War between US and China, India need to be highly cautious. Now, what's the solution? What's the way ahead? Simply, the solution is that India has accepted the invitation of Donald Trump, and India is going to participate in the next G7 summit. That's okay, but India should calculate all the risks, and India should keep all the options open. That is, India should be prepared for any kind of worst situation. G11 might be a fancy idea, G11 might be a dream, and G11 cannot see the day. It might be possible. Now, India should work diplomatically with China, because China should not get any such kind of message that India is making an alliance with US against China. So India should manage all the countries very tactfully. The countries like Russia, China and US, all countries should be managed by US very tactfully.